Prager University, a wonderful YouTube channel where I get a lot of my content from because they're dumb. They say a lot of dumb things, and it's really easy to respond to. And, sometimes low-hanging fruit, not the worst thing in the world. I find it fun. Let's take a look and see what Prager U has to say about police. Go where crime is.
The police are my friends, a senior citizen blurted out in the middle of a police community meeting I attended in the South Bronx. I've heard variations on this theme dozens of times from the law-abiding residents of high-crime communities.
So you see a lot of boomers have this opinion that the police are my friend and that the police are the good guys and it's just a few bad apples because they're not the ones that are subject to scrutiny anymore. The majority of people that are profiled by police are young, predominantly black men that get profiled and scrutinized by police. Old white ladies at a police gathering where they're talking to their community are not their target demographic for their attentions. So of course, old people, especially old white ladies, but old white people in particular, are going to have this kind of opinion of police because they're not subject to the same attitudes from the police that young people and young black people in particular are subject to.
These hardworking people don't loathe the police, quite the opposite. They understand what so many seem to have forgotten or never understood. Police spend most of their time in minority communities, that is mostly black communities, because that is where innocent people are most being hurt by violent street crime.
So I talked about this in my 1350 video and in several videos, but the reason why black communities tend to be more crime-ridden is because, one, poverty breeds crime, and because generational socioeconomical disenfranchisement has been subjected upon the black community. They find themselves in these kinds of communities. Also, black neighborhoods are over-policed. They're going to have higher rates of crime because that's where the police are to stop it. If there are more police in an area, they're going to catch more criminals than in an area that only has one or two cops, which you see in more affluent neighborhoods. When I was growing up, I lived in a high crime area. I actually lived next door, I was told, to a Crip safe house. The gang, the Crips, their safe house was right next door to me. There were cops there all the time. And then we moved. We moved like 4 or 5 blocks over to this white suburban neighborhood, and I saw, in the 5 years that I lived there, I think I saw a cop drive down our street twice. And the neighbors across the street were, I believe they were cooking meth. That's what I was told. I don't know for sure because the police were never there. But as far as I was told, there was a meth lab across the street, but they were never caught because the police were never there. The more police there are in an area, the more crime they're going to find because they're the ones that are there to find it, to investigate it, and to arrest the people that are doing it. If you're committing a crime and there are no cops around, you're not going to be added to that statistic. So we have the problem of socioeconomical disenfranchisement of the black community, which leads them, along with redlining, leads them to be placed and to find themselves in these inner city communities that have high crime rates, and on top of that, over-policing of these areas leads to higher crime rates statistically, at least by the numbers, than more affluent areas where the police aren't patrolling as heavily.
To put it plainly, police go where the crime is. In the 75 largest...
So the police are there because for generations, racist politicians have put it into the minds of law enforcement that black people are criminals, and so we need to police their communities. So of course they're going to discover higher crime rates because that's where they have been told to go. Because that's where these racist politicians from previous generations believed the crime would be because they had racist views of black people. If that didn't happen, we would see different patterns in our policing across the country.
U.S. counties, about 60% of robbery and murder defendants are black, even though blacks comprise only 15% of the population.
Are they changing the statistic? Is it 60-50 now? I thought it was 13-50. Is it 60-15 now?
In those counties. In New York City, blacks make up 73% of all shooting victims, though they are 23% of the city's population.
A lot of those shootings are gang-related shootings. Criminals shooting criminals. It's not, black people aren't going out and murdering the nice white lady down the street 73% of the time. A lot of these shootings in New York City are organized crime syndicates fighting against one another. This paints a different picture of what the statistic that they're putting out here, if the statistic is accurate, actually means and what it actually looks like.
In Chicago in 2016,
see, this whole video, I'm going to venture to guess in 5 minutes, they're going to spend 5 minutes and 51 seconds demonizing black people in this country to try and appeal to their base, appeal to their conservative viewers, and reaffirm their viewers' opinions that black people are bad, black people are criminals, and I'm not a bad person for being racist. I'm just predicting it now. That's what this whole video is going to be.
There were 4,300 shooting victims, almost all black.
Shooting victims. And a lot of those, again, are products of gang violence. This is not black people going out and shooting random citizens.
Among the 24
And why do black people find themselves involved in organized crime? Because their socioeconomic status in this country has put them in a position that is, in their minds, the only way, their only viable option for any sort of financial stability. If you've been disenfranchised for generations and your father was involved in these things and your grandfather was involved in these things, and that's all you've been brought up around, that's the culture that you were raised in, that is the line of thinking that you're going to go into. And those situations were brought about through systemic issues such as redlining and racism within hiring, discrimination, and Jim Crow, broken windows policing, things like that, led to that kind of mindset within the black community. And it's not their fault that they have this kind of mindset. We, as the majority race in this country, have put them in that position.
Victims under the age of 12 was a 3-year-old shot on Father's Day who is now paralyzed for life, and a 10-year-old shot on Labor Day whose pancreas and spleen were ripped apart.
So this is something that's disgusting. You guys couldn't see the video, but this is something disgusting that conservatives do all the time. They use the bodies of children who are victims of terrible crimes to prop up their racist narratives. The Cannon Hinnon shooting, where they tried to paint this situation as racially motivated, even though it wasn't, and tried to create this national outcry of why isn't the media talking about this? Where are the protests for this little boy? They were using this tragedy that was visited upon a child to try and prop up their racist narratives, and it's disgusting that people like this do this in our country. It's absolutely abhorrent.
This is the reality that police commanders in urban areas face every day. And every day they get calls from law-abiding citizens in high-crime neighborhoods begging for assistance. So are the police friend or foe? Are they engaging in an epidemic of deadly racist violence?
Both. Police in this country have a problem with stereotyping and profiling people of color, black people in particular, in this country, and leading to higher arrest rates of black people in this country. And they're also trying to do what their job was originally intended to and stop violent crime. Originally, the police were instituted in this country as slave catchers to try and catch runaway slaves, and then when slavery was abolished after the Civil War, they were then used to round up black people to put them on chain gangs, because that was the only form of legalized slavery that's still legal in America today that existed at the time. So yeah, it's a little bit of both. The problem that we're trying to address is the former, this epidemic of deadly racist violence that's going on in our country. But you want to know how to fix the problem with the problem with the black community that these conservatives always talk about? invest financially in those communities, fund their schools properly, offer them better opportunities within their own communities for financial gain, invest in businesses in those areas that hire within that community. Don't bring outside employees to come and work in those businesses. Hire in those communities, create businesses that are built by and staffed by people in that community, offering them better opportunities for financial gain, so that they don't feel as though that their only option is to resort to a life of crime. Invest in the education in that community, rather than having the schools being funded by property taxes, knowing that these areas have low property values. Instead, fund them by the number of students attending rather than property taxes, so that they can get a quality, well-funded education, so that they have the opportunity to achieve higher education and move into the corporate world by having a degree. In this country, if you don't have a degree, your financial options are highly limited. Having a degree in this country opens a lot of doors, but people in these low-income communities don't have the opportunity to achieve that level of education because of the subpar education that they received as a child. Those are ways that we can directly affect these problems of increased crime in these areas. And also, have the cops patrol there less. That's a big reason why property values are so low, is because there are more cops there, so they catch more crime, and the higher the crime in the area, the lower the property value is, which lowers the property taxes that are collected in that area. That's how you address these problems.
As we so often hear, in 2019, the police killed 235 blacks, most of them armed or dangerous.
Most of them. You see, most is not all, and that's the problem. If that number was all, and they were all presenting a direct threat to that officer's life, people wouldn't have as much of an issue with it. But you have to say most, because that number isn't zero.
Out of 1,004 police shooting victims overall.
So, black people... Okay, 1,004 police shootings in this country. 235 of them were black. Let's pull up a calculator really quick. 235 divided by 1,004. 23% of people killed by police were black, despite the fact that black people make up 13% of the population. Or I guess in this video they said 15% of the population. That number is 10% higher. Why are black people being killed more by police? I'm going to venture to guess racism that's been baked into our country for the last 400 years has something to do with that.
That 25% ratio is actually less than what the black crime rate would predict, since police shootings are a function of the rate at which officers encounter violent suspects.
No, it's not. As we saw in multiple police killings just this year alone, a lot of these unjustified killings have been by unarmed black men or women. Look at Breonna Taylor. She was sleeping in her bed and she was killed by police. Her boyfriend fired upon what he perceived to be an intruder because the officers were they were not in uniform. They did not announce their presence. They executed a no-knock warrant in civilian clothes, and he believed that their house was being they were having a home invasion, and grabbed his gun and tried to defend his home. And they shot at him and hit Breonna Taylor, I believe it was 15 times. I'm not 100% sure, but shot her a fuck ton and then let her bleed out for 20 minutes rather than giving her medical attention, and then she died. She was not a threat to them, yet she died. What you're saying here is false.
What about the unarmed victims of fatal police shootings? As of June 1st, 2020, the Washington Post's database of fatal police shootings in 2019 showed 9 unarmed black victims and 19 unarmed white victims of fatal police shootings.
Look at that. Almost 30 victims of police shootings in America, and the suspect was unarmed. Why is that number not 0? I went over this in a previous video, but in Japan, in 2019, they had 2 people killed by police. 2 people total killed by police, and they have about a third of the population. So if we scale their population up to ours, that would be 6. They would have 6 people killed by police. We had 1,004, as they said in their video, in 2019. And 28 of them were unarmed. What the fuck? We have a problem that needs to be addressed in this country, and you're trying to push it under the rug saying, well, black people are violent, so they deserve it. Black people commit crimes, so they deserve it. That is the kind of mentality that we're trying to push back against.
By comparison, about 7,500 blacks die of criminal homicide a year.
This is the black-on-black crime narrative that these white conservatives try to push when they're faced with the reality of police unjustly and disproportionately killing black people in this country. Well, black people kill more black people than police do. So if you want to say Black Lives Matter, deal with the black-on-black crime. Despite the fact we don't do this in any other kind of situation when we're talking about deaths, either by police or not, we don't try to point to another statistic to try and invalidate that one. This is solely a strategy used by conservatives trying to push this narrative.
You know about George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. But
Yes.
what about Tony Timpa? In 2016, 3 Dallas police officers held the handcuffed Timpa, a white man, on the ground for 13 minutes with a knee to his back, while he pleaded for help. His death was ruled a homicide caused by the officer's physical restraint and by cocaine. The point here is...
Were those officers prosecuted? Why are you not mad about that? Police brutality and the issues surrounding it do not only affect black people, and that we aren't trying to fix it for only black people. It just disproportionately affects them. But were those officers charged and convicted? Let's go back and get that kid's name. Boop, 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 boop. Tony Timpa. Yeah, man. Minimize. Tony Timpa. Death. Tony Timpa. CNN. 2019. The body camera. Blah, blah, blah. Struggling with Dallas police officers, holding him down. Shut up. Within minutes, he had stopped breathing. They joked about it. The city of Dallas and its police department fought the release of the footage, first citing an ongoing investigation that saw the 3 officers indicted, and then the case's dismissal. So the case was dismissed. Let's just make sure. Let's make sure. Tony Timpa, officers convicted. I can't type. Charges dismissed. Federal judge tosses excessive force. So, yeah, so the cops weren't even held accountable for this crime. Why are you not mad about that? Why are you not angry that these cops murdered this person? It was ruled a homicide from the officer's physical restraint and cocaine, and the officers walked free. This is what we're protesting for white people too. Why are you not mad about this? Why are you using this as a see it happens to white people too, so you should just shut up about it? It's disgusting.
Restraint and by cocaine. The point here is not to justify police misconduct, but to rebut the claim that questionable tactics occur only or even disproportionately in the case of black suspects.
It does happen. It doesn't happen only in the case of black suspects, but it happens disproportionately, according to statistics on police brutality, police killings, and police interactions, to black people in this country. The data is not on your side. You are factually wrong.
Indeed, it is premature to conclude that the killing of George Floyd was a product of racial animus at all, as opposed
We aren't arguing that the cops killed him because he was black. There is a good case to be made for that, but the cops killed him unjustly. It was an extrajudicial execution by the police officers because they were on a power trip. The officers did not like that George Floyd wasn't simply kowtowing to every single one of their demands and killed him for it. You see, police cars have this neat function where the back seat works kind of like a mini jail cell where you take a suspect and put them back there and they cannot get out. They had him in the back of the police cruiser and they took him out because he was having a panic attack, and instead of allowing him to sit there where he was not, at that point, was not resisting, and he was already cuffed. They put him on the ground, and they put a knee on his neck and suffocated him to death. We're not saying that racism was the only motivation behind the killing of George Floyd, but the killing of George Floyd was a murder, and this is an epidemic in our country that needs to be addressed, and the powers that be, the people in power, are refusing to do anything about it, and that's what the protests are for.
It was to poor training and the officer's unfit temperament.
That's still a problem. It doesn't have to be... Officers don't have to kill a black suspect because they are black. They don't have to outright say, I'm going to kill this black person, for it to be something that the Black Lives Matter community should worry about. The fact that they killed him at all is a problem, and the fact that they killed him at all is the reason why they're protesting, because it happens all too often in this country.
Ideally, officers would take no one's life in the course of their duties.
And we see that in other countries. In the UK, I believe the chart we looked at, they didn't have any killings. In Japan, they had 2. In America, there was over 1,000.
But in light of the number of arrests that officers make each year, around 10 million, and the number of deadly weapons attacks on officers, 27 a day, it is not clear that 1,000 civilian deaths, the vast majority occurring in the face of potentially deadly attack.
You see, right there, the vast majority occurring in the face of potentially deadly attack. That's the problem. The fact that you can say the vast majority instead of all of them is the problem. And we're not even going to get into the problem with the prison industrial complex and the fact that asinine things are criminalized in this country for the sake of putting people in prison so that they can work in modern day work for a modern day legal slave culture in this country. We're not even going to get into that. We're just going to address the points that they're making, which right here, they out themselves. The fact that they have to say the vast majority instead of all speaks to the fact that there is a problem.
Show a law enforcement profession that is out of control. Can police methods be improved? Of course they can, with more hands-on tactical training, more practice in de-escalation, and better techniques to control stress.
And that's a lot of the things that we're advocating for during these protests and asking for as far as police reform.
What won't help is defunding police agencies.
Yes, it will, by taking those funds and allocating them to other departments that would handle things like wellness checks, mental health issues, and basically anything that's not a violent crime that would reduce the mortality rate when coming in contact with law enforcement a lot. And that's what defund the police is about.
Officers in depleted departments who cannot get backup when they face dangerous suspects will be even more stressed out and more at risk of making bad decisions.
Well, if police only need the funding to address violent crime, instead of having to address traffic stops, mental health crises, wellness checks, loose animals, and all these other non-violent crime-related calls, which are the majority of the calls that they end up going to, if all they had to deal with was violent crime, the only thing they had to deal with was something that required somebody with a gun, they would have all the funding and all of the backup they needed.
Response times will increase. Cash-starved agencies will train less, not more. If the goal is to reduce crime, shifting police funding to social services is also a mistake.
Why? That would reduce the police's responsibility, meaning they would need less funding because there would be less things that they had to handle.
For decades, New York City was spending 1/7 of all government welfare dollars in America. Yet crime started.
There's a difference between welfare checks and having a social worker come and conduct a wellness check rather than somebody with a gun, because we see a lot of the times police shootings occur during wellness checks where the cop gets spooked and shoots at somebody through a window, and that person more than likely is having a mental health crisis. That may not be the case, but it's so many times over and over again in this country we see police getting spooked, getting trigger happy, and shooting at somebody inside of their own home because they perceive a threat there where there is none. Whereas if somebody who didn't have a gun was knocking on that door, they wouldn't have the opportunity to shoot that person because they wouldn't have the tool to do so. There's a difference between giving somebody a welfare check and having a social worker handle different aspects that the police currently do.
Falling in the city only when the NYPD adopted the data-driven policing that has now become the norm across the country, sending officers to the areas where they are most needed. That norm is now threatened. Sure, there are bad cops of all races who must be removed. That is true of every profession and always will be. But so is this. The overwhelming majority of officers are motivated by a desire to help the most vulnerable among us.
Yes, most cops are good people. However, one, they work for a system that systemically oppresses black people and people of color in this country. And two, when a fellow officer does something fucked up and they don't speak out about it, they become a bad cop. If you see something bad happening and you don't speak up, you are not just as bad, but you are almost as bad as that person. If you as an individual saw a woman getting raped and you didn't say anything, you didn't do anything to help, you didn't call the police, you just walked on and kept silent and didn't rat that person out, whether they're your friend or not, you are a massive part of that problem. And it's the same concept when it's applied to law enforcement. If you as a police officer sees a fellow officer using excessive force or killing somebody and come to their defense or don't say anything and keep your mouth shut, you are part of the problem. And that's what the phrase ACAB speaks to.
Police are not the problem.
Yes, they
Racism is not the problem.
Yes, it is.
Crime is the problem. The
Not
law-abiding
entirely.
citizens of high-crime communities, the ones who will pay the price of a diminished police presence, get it. If you believe
People that haven't had negative interactions with police have different opinions of police. Yeah, of course they do. But the people that have the negative interactions with the police are the ones that need to have their voices heard. All right.
that all Black
finish this
lives
up.
matter, you should too. I'm Heather McDonald, Senior Fellow at the Manhattan.
Okay. So, yeah, so that was Prager U talking out their ass about police brutality, misrepresenting statistics and painting the black community as the problem in this country rather than racism that's baked into our society. It's kind of disgusting to listen to these people talk, but again, Prager U, low-hanging fruit. Sometimes you need a break. If you like this video, drop a like, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell button. I upload twice a week. I'll try to increase that in the future, but at this point, I'm uploading twice a week. I also stream on Twitch Tuesdays, Thursdays, and then Sunday nights. I do video games, so feel free to come and join the community. But until the next one, peace.